What's up, guys? Nuance Bro checking in, and today we're going to be talking about some recent attempts at gun control. So recently, a lot of things have happened surrounding the topic of gun control. We've had a few recent tragedies, and slightly before that, we actually had some gun legislation passed that a lot of people didn't even realize. So we're going to talk about the pieces of legislation that passed, another one that's been proposed, some executive action, as well as other actions by the Biden administration to further hinder gun rights. So as you can see here from NPR, House passes bills to strengthen gun laws, including expanding background checks. And those two bills are H.R. 8 and H.R. 1446. Now, in order to assure you that I'm not letting my pro-gun bias get in the way of describing what this legislation does, I'm actually going to use the description from the pro-gun control lobbying organizations like the Brady Center to Prevent Gun Violence, which actually lobbies for these types of laws to get passed. So as we can see here from the Brady website, expanding and strengthening Brady background checks. And if we scroll down, we can see H.R. 8 makes it unlawful to sell or transfer a firearm in any transaction without a Brady background check. This will expand the current Brady law to every sale or transfer in private sales, subject to the narrow exceptions listed below. And then, of course, there are a few exceptions here. Law enforcement officers acting within the scope of their duties are not affected. Transfers between spouses, domestic partners, between parents and their children, between siblings, between aunts and uncles and their nieces or nephews, or between grandparents and their grandchildren are also exempt. Number 3 is basically about inheritance after death. 4, temporary transfer that is necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm, though this definition can be argued. Does that mean you can lend someone a gun and they can hold it for 30 days thinking maybe an ex-spouse is going to beat them up? Or is it literally, oh my God, someone's approaching you and they're about to beat the crap out of you. Here, catch this gun so you can defend yourself in the next 5 minutes or 5 seconds. 5, a transfer approved by the U.S. Attorney General, aka none of the normal people. Number 6, temporary transfers in shooting ranges or while hunting, trapping, or fishing if there is no reason to believe the transferee will use the firearm in a crime. So if you're at the shooting range, you can let your buddy shoot your gun effectively. And number 7, temporary transfers where the transferee is in the presence of the transferor and there is no reason to believe the transferee will use it for illegal activity and is not prevented by state or federal law from possessing a firearm, which is effectively similar to number 6. So this closes what many in the gun control community refer to as the gun show loophole, where you can go to a gun show, which some people think you can just buy any gun at a gun show, no background check required. This is not true. It's only in certain states, and it's only for private party sales. If you're still a FFL license holder, which is you're in the business of selling guns, you still have to do all the background check stuff that's necessary, typically like as if you were to buy it from a gun store. But for private sellers, for example, myself, if I wanted to sell a gun in certain states, like the state of Texas, you don't have to go through a background check in order to sell that firearm to another person. Now, this law would make that mandatory across the country. Now, what gun rights advocates would say against a law like this is that this is not the entirety of the law. Laws like this, in order to be effective, would actually require a national firearms registry, which we currently do not have, and that legislation like this does not contain within it. In fact, the bill itself explicitly states, nothing in this act or any amendment made by this act shall be construed to authorize the establishment directly or indirectly of a national firearms registry. So you could argue it was designed to fail from the start. Now, we're going to get to some other problems with the background check system in a bit, but that has more to do with the other piece of legislation that passed the House, so hold on to that. And as you can see here, H.R. 8 passed the House on March 11th with 219 votes from Democrats, only 1 Democrat voting no, and 8 Republicans voting yes, and 202 Republicans voting no, with 1 abstaining because they weren't present, to give us a total of 227 yeses to 203 noes. Now, the other piece of legislation, which is a bit more controversial, is H.R. 1446, which closes what's known as the Charleston loophole. Now, once again, I'm going to use the Brady Center's definition or description of what this law does in order to prevent my pro-gun bias. This is the anti-gun position. They're describing their own law, the law that they lobbied for. So I just want to make that clear. And as you can see here, it's called the Enhanced Background Checks Act of 2021. And here's what they say about it. The Enhanced Background Checks Act of 2021, or H.R. 1446, provides the background check system with additional time to make a final determination on a potential firearms purchaser before a licensed dealer can transfer a gun. H.R. 1446 extends the initial background check review period from 3 to 10 business days. After the initial 10 business day period, if a background check has not been completed, a purchaser may request an expedited review to spur the FBI to complete their investigation. They may petition online or by mail and must certify that they are not prohibited from purchasing or possessing a firearm. The FBI will have 10 additional business days from the date the petition was submitted to complete the background check before a sale could proceed under federal law. Those individuals who choose not to submit a certified petition will be required to wait until their background check is complete before a transfer can proceed. So if you guys don't already know, under existing law, background checks are typically instant, but in the very rare cases where certain red flags go up that might require extra time for the FBI to investigate, the law gives the FBI 3 days to investigate before they have to effectively say, okay, the purchase can go through. So if the FBI doesn't come back in those 3 days, the gun store is free to decide to sell the firearm to the individual or not. What this law does is extend the 3 days to 10 business days, and if the petitioner doesn't request the additional 10 business days after that, effectively this could just go on forever. You could be indefinitely stalled until you decide to request a decision in that additional 10 business days. So really, at the minimum, if you have this red flag that goes up and they don't complete it within that time, and you have to go all the way through the process before determination's made, if no determination is ultimately made, you're looking at about 20 business days or a month before you can actually get your gun, if all these things happen. But if you don't sign that online petition that requests that 10 business days or whatever, you could effectively be stalled indefinitely. Now, the issue with this is that they're calling it the Charleston loophole. And the reason they call it that is because if you remember the tragedy that happened in Charleston, South Carolina, the idea was that the shooter got his gun even though he was a prohibited person because the FBI wasn't able to, do their due diligence in that 3-day period. So the 3-day period passed and then the shooter got his gun. The only problem with that narrative is there's no evidence to suggest that if the FBI had additional time, that they would have been able to come to a determination to say that this person was not allowed to possess his gun, as you can see from this news report from CBS.
When Dylan Roof walked into this gun store, there was already a paper trail. This police report where he acknowledged possessing illegal drugs. That should have kept him from being able to buy that Glock pistol, but the FBI never saw it. We now know the Lexington County, South Carolina Prosecutor's Office never responded to the FBI's request for information. The wrong police department was listed as arresting Roof. While the Lexington County Sheriff told the FBI examiner doing Roof's background check to check with the Columbia Police, the Bureau's own contact list omits the city of Columbia, even though part of the city is in Lexington County. Friday, FBI Director James Comey said, "We are definitely accountable for not having reflected the geography of South Carolina. Had that happened, we wouldn't be having this conversation."
So as you can see from James Comey, the director of the FBI at the time himself, who said it wasn't because of this 3-day waiting period or anything like that. It was because the FBI failed to account for the geography of South Carolina. They called the wrong police department. It was a miscommunication between the federal government, the state, and local governments. And the records are just poorly kept. They have a horrible system there that doesn't actually report these things to the national system. This is further emphasized by another CBS piece that talks about an FBI report where they go over this.
The report found that in 630 of 631 cases, the states did not fully update the database, and that increased the risk that individuals found by states to be prohibited purchasers could be able to purchase firearms in the future. Some of the information is still kept in file cabinets of state and local agencies.
So as you can see, even from the FBI's own report, they have problems with the existing system, which makes a case for actually improving the existing system rather than expanding it to more people and more circumstances. A nice first step might be to actually digitize documents and standardize them so you're not going through physical file cabinets of paper that have been photocopied multiple times that are barely legible. Now, just to give you guys an idea of the scale of how many of these instant background checks are actually instant versus the ones that are flagged for extra review, and of those ones that are flagged for extra review, how many of them actually end up being referred for, having the guns confiscated or having people prosecuted for trying to buy guns when they're not actually legally allowed to buy guns? We can take a look at this report from the FBI in 2014 on the NICS system. And if we go down to page 11, we can see that on average, the immediate determination rate is about 91%. So obviously the cases that take a bit longer than that, 9% of the cases. And here you can see a flow chart. So you have the 100 potential buyers or whatever. And you can see these two numbers here, 66 and 25, which effectively means immediate determinations. The 9% here is the delayed for additional review. And then of that, so of the original 100 people who are potential gun purchasers, only about 1% are actually denied. Now, here's another interesting fact. Because of the NICS section's commitment to public safety and national security, the search for needed disposition information continues beyond the 3 business days to provide a determination as stated in the Brady Act. In some instances, the information is subsequently obtained and a final status determined. However, if the final status, determined after the lapse of the 3 business days, results in a deny decision and the FFL advises the NICS section staff that the firearm was transferred, the NICS section notifies the ATF that a prohibited person is in possession of a firearm. In 2014, the NICS section referred 2,511 firearm retrieval actions to the ATF. Now, in 2014, there were about 8 million background checks that were performed, so 2,511 firearm retrieval requests, that's about 0.03% of firearm purchases, and that's assuming that each background check results in one gun. Usually, it's typically more than that on average, because one background check can account for, 10 guns, 20, 30, 40 guns, whatever. But, for the sake of argument, just to actually help bolster the argument, we're going to assume 1 gun per background check. That's 0.03% actually result in a firearm retrieval operation. Now, here's where it gets even more amazing when it comes to background checks. As you can see here from this article in the Washington Post, claimed that the Brady Law prevented 1.5 million people from buying a firearm by Glenn Kessler in 2013. If we scroll down, we can see here in this example from 2010 that there were 76,142 FBI denials referred to ATF. Of those referred to field offices, obviously, with the intent of prosecution, about 4,732, so that's 6.2% of the initials. The vast majority, 68,209, were not referred, so about 90%. And about 4.2%, or 3,163, were actually overturned. And you can see the author says here, at first glance, these numbers seemed astonishing. In other words, another 4% of initial denials were found to be wrong, and 9 out of 10 were not deemed worthy of further investigation. But it gets even worse. Then, virtually all these cases were declined by ATF field offices. Here are some key reasons, with essentially 1/4 being a case of mistaken denial even after weeks of investigation. So we can see here that 1,661 had no prosecutorial merit, 1,092 federal/state guidelines were not met, 480 were just not a prohibited person at all, 457 were closed by a supervisor, and 396 were no potential or unfounded. In the end, 62 cases were referred for prosecution, but most were declined by prosecutors or dismissed by the court. Out of the original 73,000 denials, there emerged just 13 guilty pleas. Well, isn't that amazing? 13 guilty pleas after all of that. Yet we're trying to actually expand these ineffective laws, which we've already seen. It's the actual system that's flawed first. Let's not expand a flawed system. Let's fix the system first before we expand it to everybody. So again, that's HR 1446, the Charleston loophole closing bill that they passed. This one got a little bit less support. You can see 217 Democrats voted yes, 2 voted no. 2 Republicans voted yes, 208 voted no, with 1 not voting because they weren't present, with a final tally of 219 to 210. Now, obviously, these pieces of legislation have passed before the most recent tragedies that have occurred, but since then, there has been a renewed push for gun control. Dianne Feinstein, for example, has reintroduced her assault weapons ban, the one that they had in place from 1994 through 2004, though this is a more, I guess, expanded, more comprehensive version of it. One that would probably more closely mimic the California assault weapons ban that exists today. Now, the problem with this, of course, is that members of Congress don't even know what they're voting on half the time when it comes to these laws, like assault weapons, for example, as I'm sure many of you guys remember between this exchange with Tucker Carlson and Carolyn McCarthy.
But I read the legislation. I'm sorry, I read the legislation and it said that it would regulate barrel shrouds. What's a barrel shroud, and why should we regulate that?
The guns that were chosen back in those days were basically the guns that most gangs and criminals were using to kill our police officers. I'm not saying it was the best bill, but that was the best bill they could get out at that particular time. I actually don't know what a barrel shroud is. I believe it's a shoulder thing that goes up.
No, it's not.
Now, in addition to the legislation, you have the Biden White House trying to craft gun executive orders that can't be undone. Some are speculating that this might involve a reinterpretation of existing law dealing with so-called ghost guns. If you don't know what a ghost gun is, it's basically a firearm that you create in your garage or whatever that isn't properly registered or serialized. So people will often take a block of aluminum and mill it out to become the lower of an AR-15. And then the rest of the parts they just purchase online because those parts aren't regulated. It's just the frame of the gun that's registered as the gun or considered the firearm. And the Biden administration is also urging the Supreme Court to let cops enter homes and seize guns without a warrant. This is in a recent case called Caniglia v. Strom. Basically, in this case, they're arguing that officers will be allowed to go into your home and confiscate guns as a form of community caretaking if they believe, for example, that you might be a threat to yourself or others, even if they don't really have an evidentiary basis to do so. Now, historically, this idea of community caretaking has typically been involved in repossessing someone's property, for example, a car that's been left abandoned in the middle of the road, which, of course, you don't always have time to contact the owner of the vehicle and ask for their explicit consent to have that removed from the road, or going to a judge to get some sort of warrant to take the vehicle off the road. It's just, you see it in the middle of the road, you have to remove it so it doesn't impede traffic. They're using this same idea to actually go inside of your home and take your gun away from you, potentially forever, usually temporarily, until some judge says something or whatever. It's a problem, it's dangerous, and the Biden administration is on the side of those saying that they want to take your gun away. Now, luckily, groups like the ACLU, which typically isn't a big friend to the gun rights community, is actually against the Biden administration in a case like this. So you can see that left-leaning and right-leaning groups are coming together to actually oppose the Biden administration's push to confiscate people's guns using this community caretaking exception to the Fourth Amendment. Anyways, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Social media links are in the description box below, as well as merch. Support us at nuancebro.com/join, and I'll see you next time, bro.